Funny, they always start geometry off in the second semester by doing that.
Huh, that's funny.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. Okay, let's see here. Do you have a particular one that it looks like you're doing these okay.
Yeah,
Um,
completely got the left side of the sheet, but the right side of the sheet, the ones that are answered, that's the what was written on the board.
oh,
So I completely don't, that's not my work. Like, I
oh,
don't know what's going on with that.
all right, so you can see what's being done here in the first few problems, right?
hmm
In other words, square root of 8, what you're looking for is factors of 8, one of which is a perfect square number.
hmm
And that's what we're trying to do here. So, where should we start? I'm trying
How
to
about
see where it has answers and where it doesn't have answers.
how about L? Could we do that one?
Yes. Here, let me take a quick snapshot so that I can write on the screen.
Okay.
All right, so the key is to find factors of 80, one of which is a perfect square number. Now, the ultimate key is to find factors of 80 where you get the maximum perfect square factor. Sometimes there can be more than one perfect square factor. Factor 80. Let's just start there. Over here on the left, I'm going to factor 80 by starting there. Tell me how to factor 80.
Well, don't you do like it can be devised by like 4
Well,
and 16, right?
yeah, but let's look at this factoring because this will give you a better way of doing it. The first thing I can do is I can cut 80 in half, which means I got to double that. I can cut it in half again, which means I got to double that. I can cut it in half again. I got to double that. And finally, I can cut it in half one more time. And now I can't cut 5 in half anymore, or thirds, or anything else. So I'm kind of looking at all my factors. Now, there are two sets of factors here where one of them is a perfect square number. And the one you want to pick is the biggest one. So which two factors are we going to look at?
5 and 12. Wait,
5 and
do you mean
16.
4 and 16? Or, okay.
It's 5 times 16. In other words, that when I
Okay.
factor it, that's always multiplying there. Okay. And that's correct because 16 is a perfect square number. So square root of 80 becomes what?
16 times 4.
Well, first of all, let's do this.
I mean,
Square
4
root
times.
of 16 times square root of 5. That's the first thing. In other words, you got to factor 80. 80 factors into 16 times 5. Now, what's the square root of 16?
4.
So, and that is factored all the way down. Okay? So there was already a 4 in front of this 80. So we just pulled out another 4. So 4 times 4 is 16 times root 5. And there's your answer. Now, let's talk about this. This is a good one to talk about this because you don't necessarily have to find the biggest factor. In other words, look at those two numbers. Those are also factors of 80, and 4 is a perfect square number. Okay, so this would be the square root of 4 times the square root of 20, which would be 2 root 20. The problem is root 20 isn't simplified. In other words, this is actually 2 times root 4 times root 5. And that's 2. So this gets to the same answer, 4 times root 5. It just took 2 extra steps. In other words, by using these 2 factors, it immediately got me to 4 root 5. By using those 2 factors, I started with 4 root 20, or rather 2 root 20, and had to chop it down again. And that is frequently the case. You can always get to the correct answer even if you don't start with your 2 perfect numbers, as long as one of these is a perfect square number. In other words, you wouldn't want to do those 2 numbers, 10 times 8, because that becomes root 10 times root 8, and I can't really break either one of those down very well, because neither one is a perfect square number, neither 10 nor 8.
Okay.
Okay, so let's have you do the next one, which is what? I'm a little confused here. I guess
Yeah.
numbers are the answers and the letters are the questions.
Well, he said that we didn't have to solve the riddle, so just do every problem. Could we
Okay.
do 19?
Well, those are the answers. In other words, 19 is already simplified.
Oh,
So the ones we want to do are these.
okay.
Those have to be simplified, and the numbered problems are the answers to the letters.
Got it.
Okay, so let's look at this H. In other words, we
Okay.
figured out that that was 16 root 5, which matches up with that answer right there. So 5 goes with L. Now let's look at H. So you can always take the number that's in front of the radical sign and just hold it there for a little bit, and let's simplify the radical sign. So let's go over here and simplify that.
So it'd be 27 and 2. And we just keep on cutting it in half, right?
Well, you're right. That is 27 and 2. So I could write it like this. But neither one of those 2 numbers is a perfect square number. So let's fully factor 54. Same way we did it before. You cut it in half and double that. Now I can't cut it in half anymore, but can I cut it in thirds?
Uh, yes.
Okay, so what's on the left?
8 times 3.
No, 9 times 3 is 27. So if I cut it in thirds, that becomes a 9. I have to make that 3 times 2. So those are 2 factors. And that's a perfect square number. So that's got to be it. So we've got the square root of 54 is going to be equal to the square root of 9 times the square root of 6, which is what?
54.
No, we're simplifying it. Whenever you're simplifying a radical, you always got to pull a whole number out. That's the only
3.
reason it's worth simplifying. So what's the square root of 9?
3.
The square root of 6 cannot be simplified. The reason is that it's the square root of 3 times the square root of 2, but neither of those is a perfect square number. If I can't pull a perfect square factor out of there, I don't do any factor. Okay? So this is what the square root of 54 is. Now tell me what the answer to our problem is. If we go back and we include this -3 that's in front. So what's my entire answer here?
-3 radical sine 6.
Okay, you got to multiply the -3 times the +3. So that's -9 times root 6.
Oh, got it.
Is that answer right there? Okay.
Right.
All right, let's just keep using that same technique. So the next one we really have to deal with is the square root of 40. So break that down.
So it'll be 20 times 2.
Neither one of those is a perfect square.
And then 10 times 4.
Ah, there you go. 4 is the perfect square, so I put it there. What's that become? What's that equal to? What's the square root of 4?
2.
In other words, when we're simplifying these things, our entire goal is to pull a whole number out. If I can't pull a whole number out, I can't simplify. So that's why you break it down into factors where one of the numbers is a perfect square, because that allows me to pull a whole number out. Okay?
Okay.
So that's the square root of 40, which means the answer to this question is what?
-14 radical sine 10.
Uh-huh.
Cool.
Just that answer right there. Okay, how about the next one? What about square root of 121?
Ooh. Um,
This is one you might not know, but it's worth knowing.
yeah.
You can see that I can't cut it in half, right?
Uh-huh.
Can't cut it in thirds. Can't cut it in fifths. But it does turn out that there's a whole number, that is, in other words, the square root of 121 is a whole number. What is it?
11?
Uh-huh. So what's the answer here?
Just 11, right?
It's -8 times 11.
Oh, -88.
Right there. Okay. Let's look at the next one. Again, just set the 2 aside and deal with what's inside the radical. So the square root of 500. What's going to be a good way to break that down?
5 times 100?
Yeah, and you put the perfect square number first, which is the 100, and you put the non-perfect square number next. Now what's the square root of 100?
10.
What's the answer?
Um, wait, I got this 20 sine, wait, 20 radical sine 5?
Uh-huh, right there. In other words, you solve the radical, and then whatever you get, you multiply by that coefficient that was in front. And you kind of do the radical first. You kind of work right to left, not left to right on most of these. Okay, how about the next one? In other words, what am I going to solve first?
Radical sign 24.
Okay, what's that going to be?
6 and 4.
So tell me what that's equal to.
3 radical sign 4.
First of all, write it as radical sign
Oh, okay.
6 times radical sign 4, and now simplify that.
Then it's, wait, no, then it's 2 radical sign 4.
Radical sign 6. This is the thing that turns into a 2.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I didn't happen to write it in the normal way. In other words, I wrote it the way you told me to write it, which was radical sign 6 times radical sign 4. Well, this is what turns into the whole number. So
Got it.
whatever doesn't turn into it, that's the thing you have to preserve. You got to preserve that. So if root 24 is 2 root 6, then what is the answer to t?
Negative 8 radical sign 6.
Right there. Okay. Let's, excuse me. The next one. We're going to deal with this. Now, some of these, you kind of get the hang of it after you do it a while. But let's go through this process one more time, because this is actually a pretty good illustration of how to do it. There's our two numbers, the only two factors we know at this point. What's another couple of factors? In other words, can I cut this in half?
No.
Can I cut it in thirds?
No.
I don't need to check fourths, because if I can't cut it in half, I definitely can't cut it in fourths. How about fifths? Fifths is the next thing to try. It's the only other thing to try. Can I cut it in fifths?
Yes.
Okay, what's it become? Divide that by 5, what do you get?
35.
And then I have to multiply it 1 by 5 if I'm going to cut that in fifths. Okay, that doesn't help a whole lot. I still don't have a perfect number there, or a perfect square. How about 35? Can I cut 35 in fifths?
Yes.
Which
It's 7.
becomes 7. I got to multiply that by 5. Now I just found a perfect square number. 25 is a perfect square number. So I don't have to keep looking. So what's that equal to? Or I should say, what's the square root of 175 equal to?
Square root 7 times, radical sign 7. Wait, no.
Put that
Radical
number first.
Yeah, radical sign 25 times radical sign 7.
Yeah, put the perfect square number first, because you're going to pull it out next. What's that turn into?
5 times radical sign 7.
Now, what's that turn into?
15 times radical sign 7.
Right there, number 26. Okay, Notice we're using the same exact technique on every problem. So, right offhand, it's probably not that easy to figure out what the two factors of this are, but there's one thing that should give you a clue. If the digits of any number add to 9, then that number is divisible by 9.
Okay.
Okay? And these add to 9. So 1 plus 0 plus 8 equals 9. That means the number 108 is divisible by 9. So I know that I can pull at least a 9 out of there. And when I divide 108 by 9, I get 12. Now, it turns out that 12 can also be factored down. In other words, now I've got 3 root 12, but root 12 can turn into root 4 times root 3. That turns into a 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So I did it in 2 steps, and I didn't do it the most efficient way possible. Notice that 108 is also root 36 times root 3. And that immediately turns into 6 times root 3. So once again, if you can find factors where one of them is a perfect square, you'll eventually get to the right answer. But you'll get there quicker if you can find factors where you're looking at the maximum perfect square number. 36 is bigger than 9. So it's always going to be better to factor it with these two numbers than it is going to be with these two numbers. This one required me to go through 2 more steps to get to the answer, whereas that one gave it to me in 1 step. Okay, so the square root of 108 is indeed 6 root 3. So what's the answer here?
30 times radical cosine 3.
Right there. All right.
Do you think we could do one more
Sure.
with letter P?
Find where it would be, because we've done all of them.
Could we do P?
Yeah. So there's an easy way to look at doing these that have zeros after them. If there are an even number of zeros, for instance 2, well, that becomes 10. If there are an odd number of zeros, then it doesn't factor into a nice whole number. But if there are an even number of zeros, well, then that becomes 100. Notice that the square root has exactly half the number of zeros that were in the problem. In other words, this had 4 zeros, therefore my answer has 2 zeros. So what's the square root of 1 million, which has 6 zeros?
1,000.
And
So that
there's kind of another way to think of this that maybe is a little easier. And that is to say that the square root of 1,000,000 is the square root of 10 to the 6th power, right? There's 6 zeros.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the square root of 10 cubed times the square root of 10 cubed. Well, 10 cubed is 1,000. So the square root of 1,000 times the square root of 1,000 is 1,000. So if there's a lot of zeros, I still think this first method is the easiest way to do it, whereas you just see whether you have an even or an odd number of zeros. If it's an even number, you cut them in half, and that's your square root of that number.
Okay.
Notice the one above. That's got an odd number of zeros. Therefore, it's not 10 and it's not 100. It's some number like 34, 33 and a half. I mean, if you leave it as a radical sign, then you could pull 100 out. So it'd be 10 root 10 would be the answer, times 2 gives you 20 root 10. So there's the answer. And here, let's just go through this one since we're talking about dealing with these numbers that have zeros on them. Okay, first thing to notice, we got an odd number of zeros. Therefore, it does not, you can't just cut the zeros in half. Okay? However, it is this, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. Now this has an even number of zeros in it. So what's the square root of 100?
10.
So that's what square root of 1,000 is. And then times that 2 that is in front gives you 2, or 20 root 10, which is that answer right there.
Got it.
Okay. Are there any others you need to take a look at here? Even over here on the left?
Oh no, I got the
Most
left.
of those seem to be done. And you can see that she has pulled out the greatest perfect square number.
Yeah, I did these. Those weren't from the board.
Oh, okay. So that's your work there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Phoebe, will that take care of you tonight?
Yep.
Sounds good. I will talk to you next time.
Yep. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye.